They need to be paid back a little bit, but I think there also needs to be greater emphasis placed upon the other teams to actually step up their game.
This,
Like
that's
this, I mean, this is the dichotomy of the argument, isn't it? It's do you pay back Red Bull, or do you just tell the others to up their game?
This is the only time I've watched F1 where I can feel confident that at least I know someone is thinking about what's going. They may not going on. They may not get it right every single time, but at least they understand what it is I want, and that's what they're chasing. And I can't fault that.
oh, Shez, we have divergence finally. Houston, we have a problem. I think the core audience will want competition, want racing for first, second, third every single week, will want to be able to attend a Las Vegas Grand Prix without having to remortgage their bloody house. These are the things that we're talking about, right?
That's what they want to do. And the rules that they have created, in theory, should allow them to do that. In practice, that hasn't worked this season, but that's not their fault. They can't, they don't control physics, and they also don't control what teams can do. Now, if you want them to do exactly what you're talking about, make it a spec series. Just make it spec series, and then everyone has the same car. But then you lose the essence of what Formula One is about.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown. With me, as always, my esteems, my right honourable colleagues, co-hosts, Baxty and Shez. How are we doing, fellas?
I'm doing very well.
It doesn't matter how you're doing. No, I'm joking. That's so very... I'm such an idiot.
Wow, we're there now.
Sorry. I had to do the right thing. I've been watching too much wrestling all week and I've been storing it up. Go on then, fellas. Let's talk about some F1. There is only one thing to talk about, isn't there? That matters. And that is the cancellation of the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. I still don't like saying that. I just prefer Imola or San Marino, but officially it is the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, and we got an announcement from the FIA at 12 p.m. British Standard Time saying, finally, a bit after time, that they had cancelled it, that it would not be postponed, and that the next Grand Prix will be Monaco. Shez, I will frame the question in this way. They made the right decision. I don't think that much is up for debate. But was the FIA's hand forced? Would they have made this same decision, but for the intervention and the conversation that they had with the Emilia Romagna mayor, Italian politicians, etc., etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. First off, just obviously want to send out our regards to everyone in Italy right now. The pictures are pretty horrific, and I can only imagine what everyone's going through over there. So,
well said.
I hope everyone is able to clear up and things get better soon. But yeah, I mean, this is a fairly standard sort of question, isn't it? And I know we talked about the response to the coronavirus pandemic back in 2020 and how people were, but I think, given that there was a delay and then another delay before they finally told us this time that the race was going to be cancelled, it was always a little bit up in the air. There was always still that risk that we were going to have a repeat of what happened 3 years ago. And it's I think, like you said, it probably wasn't that up for debate this time around. There was just too much pressure from too many officials on the FIA for this to go ahead. But there's always a slightly uncomfortable feeling in the back of your mind that maybe the FIA is still trying to push. It's not an internal decision. It always needs to come from outside.
Mate.
And I part of me gets that, because there's a lot of stakeholders involved here, and they need to I guess also have assurances that the FIA and F1 are doing everything they can to make a race go ahead, because there's so much money involved. But sometimes it would be nice to see that the governing body is on the front foot and not trying to push something that is a dead duck.
Mate, they've only got one gear, these FIA chaps. They I just don't feel like they ever do things for the right reasons. It's always, as soon as I read the headlines in The Guardian, 20 million is what was on the table from that cancellation of that Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. So I suppose that answers your question. But Baxty, what do you think, mate? Is this the FIA doing what the FIA do and being doing the right things for the wrong reasons?
Yeah, firstly, before I answer that, I just want to echo what Shez said. Obviously, all our thoughts are with everyone in the Emilia Romagna region right now. Obviously, the flooding looks absolutely horrific, and I know that lives have been lost. So, obviously, thoughts are with the families that have lost loved ones. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think there was talk that they were planning on doing the race weekend, Saturday, Sunday, so they'd have practice on Saturday and then do quali and the race on Sunday. But when it comes to a situation like this, I think you've just got to take the humanity into it. You know, look at it from the human perspective. The people of Emilia Romagna, the region, they're not going to give two hoots about a Grand Prix. You know, they're going to be worrying about rebuilding their lives. And I think what Formula One, I don't know if they are doing this, so I don't wish to presume that they're not, but I would love to see some kind of outreach work from Formula One, the Formula One community. I know AlphaTauri have put details up of a fundraiser which I'm going to be donating to, and I think see people getting involved in that way and actually helping out, because let's not forget this region is also where AlphaTauri are housed, and that they've been affected by this directly. So it's never ideal, but we know what the FIA are like. We saw what happened in Australia in 2020. They were forced into a decision they didn't want to make, and I feel like they've been forced into a decision they didn't want to make this time. You know, bit of a peek behind the curtain here, but we were messaging about this around lunchtime, and I did see that the Deputy Prime Minister of Italy had directly stepped in and said, we don't want to be hosting this race at this time. As soon as that happens, it's game over. I mean, you can't do it. And I mean, I get the shareholders and everything else, but redirect that money into humanitarian efforts and making sure people can rebuild their lives. You know, not just sort of PR friendly one offs. You know, I want to. Let's make sure that these people can rebuild, because what's happening right now is horrible.
Well said, sir. Absolutely well said. And I echo, of course, those sentiments. Send thoughts and prayers to all those in the Emilia Romagna region, and because some of those pictures are all like the video of the guy carrying his little one over, like it looks bad, man. So again, sometimes as much as I don't like it, sometimes F1 and sports has to absolutely take a back seat because lives and families and homes are absolutely at risk. So echo both of your sentiments on that. But if we segue back to F1, I hear that there were some upgrades in the offing, that there were a raft of upgrades potentially from Mercedes that were going to be revealed at this Grand Prix, similar for Alpha, I think. When do we think we'll see these upgrades, Baxty? Now, what goes on with them? Do they just rock them out around Monaco, or do they just not bother and delay it further? Because I'm guessing that some of those upgrades and the data that you get from said upgrades isn't going to be, you're not going to get perfect information around Monaco, right? The anomaly that is that track.
Yeah, we'll obviously have to wait and see what Mercedes do, but this much vaunted Imola upgrade has been delayed. I think they're better off just doing one last outing for the zero side pod car, and let's not forget Barcelona is a very common test track, so I can't think of a better track to actually go out and get some data than Barcelona, something they know really well. We know that Monaco is a tricky circuit. They have specialist things they do with setups for the cars for Monaco, specifically with rear wings and steering columns and everything else. So it would be stupid for them to do it. They might do it, but I think Barcelona is probably the more realistic option.
Don't hate it, Baxty. What say you, Shezinho?
So I'm going to go completely in the opposite direction. I think that's probably what they are going to do. Probably, but I don't know. From what I understand, it's not an all or nothing upgrade. This one, it's the first part of a series of upgrades that Mercedes are bringing. And I guess my sort of thoughts on this are that you want to get as much information about your package as you possibly can. And although Monaco might not be the most representative track on the grid, you're still not on the grid, on the calendar, you're still going to get information about how your package is performing as an overall thing, even at Monaco. Losing Imola is, I think, a bit of a problem for Mercedes because it definitely puts their schedule right behind. I think they were planning to be quite aggressive over the next few races, and every race there was going to be something a bit new and more data being gathered and more performance being deployed. But I think the fact that they've lost this race means that it's actually even more important for them to bring an upgrade to the next race, because again, this isn't a team that's in the running for a championship because their car just isn't going to allow them to do it. So whether they bring it and take a step backwards or they don't bring it and they stay where they are, I think it's not a particularly lose. There's not a great deal to lose, even if they bring that package along. And the likelihood is that they will learn something from it. And when data is king, I would, if it was me, I would bring it and take what I get from it.
Don't hate it, Shez. And to that point, mate, you segue very nicely onto a question from Wayne Pooney. And again, if you want to firstly subscribe, like, all that other good stuff. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, do us a favour, scroll to the top and leave a 5-star review. Question: do you think Mercedes are missing Aldo Costa? Seems like him leaving in 2019 plus the loss of Nicky, I would have as one of the reasons why they are doing so poor at the moment. Chaps, what do you think of the? I think the broader. Okay, why are Mercedes flopping the case? Baxty, what are the 2 or 3 reasons that you attribute this wholly to? Do you think?
Now, if I remember correctly, Aldo Costa was primarily involved on the Brixworth engine side, wasn't he? Yeah. So I don't think the PU is the issue so much. I think it's clearly not the quickest. I think it's probably the second or third quickest, along with the Ferrari and not the Ferrari, the Red Bull and probably just the Red Bull. It's probably alongside. But I would also say that I think the biggest problem that Mercedes have had is that they didn't. I think they relied too much on their internal data. Yeah, we've heard the story from Peter Windsor where the aerodynamicist Peter Wright said good luck with the porpoising, and they seemingly ignored that advice.
Unbelievable.
They don't, from the sounds of things, they haven't been listening to their drivers because Lewis and George have, from what we've been able to understand from what they've been saying, that they've been giving feedback and they haven't taken that on board, seemingly. And also, I think the biggest problem is they just got the concept wrong. I know there's been some complaint about the regs that, there seems to be this kind of one ideal solution to the regs, which I don't know if that's true. I'm not technically minded enough to comment on that, but I think it's clear that whatever Mercedes did, they maximized its potential and they can't go any further with it, which is why a lot of the teams looked at the zero side pods and went, that's not for us. And I think they were maybe a bit too slow at realizing that. And I think we've spoken at length about how Brazil was probably more of a red herring than it was a breakthrough moment for Mercedes. But if there's a team that I would back to overcome this challenge that they've been presented with, I think it would be Mercedes. I think in this cost cap era, they are capable of doing that. And also, I think, Red Bull were the last team to be presented with such a challenge, and it took them 8 years. I don't see Mercedes taking that long. I think that team is too good, too well led as well by Toto Wolff. He's got everybody heading in the right direction. They all know what their game plan is. So I would back Mercedes to come back from this, but it might take some time.
Oh, here is hoping, Baxty. Let me pitch another question at you, Shez. There's a question that's got a gazillion likes on it that I think you'll appreciate. So here goes nothing. I'm not going to read out the full one. Why does Ferrari get so much criticism as compared with McLaren and Williams, who are second and third most successful teams? Ferrari have won 40-something races in the last decade, and Williams and McLaren just one win between them. Go on then, Shez. Attack that, mate. Do you worst.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many Ferrari fans out there, right? Like, everyone has an opinion about Ferrari, whether you like them or you're not a big fan of them. Everyone has an opinion about Ferrari, and there's something about the tradition that they have. You know, there's something about going to Monza and seeing the Tifosi out there and soaking in that atmosphere. And when you see that and Ferrari are doing well, you know, I mean, there's nothing else like it in Formula One. You know, McLaren winning at Silverstone is great, but they share that out with 2 or 3 other teams. And it never quite has the same atmosphere as the romance of Ferrari. And they've got tenure. You know, they've been around for longer than any other team. They've been more successful than any other team, not by every metric, but as an absolute, they have been. And they're the team that every I would say every employee in Formula One and every other team wants to work at some point. You can't say the same for Williams and McLaren. And those teams have been defined by the team principles that set them up, right? McLaren's had its eras, you know, the Bruce McLaren era, the Ron Dennis era, now the Zach Brown era, but it's had that sort of transition. And Williams, you know, once the Williams family took their foot off the pedal, you know, it was never really the same team. Whereas Ferrari has kept that tradition of Enzo for years and years and years. So I think we're comparing essentially what is an Italian national institution to, you know, 2 British teams. And I understand that they have history. And you know, personally, I'm sitting here with my McLaren t-shirt on today, and I'm like, I must have a lot of love for McLaren, and I think and I hope that they have they make the right steps and they get back to where they should be. But Ferrari is a different animal. Even if they're sort of top 3, it's not enough, because they should be at the top. And the reason for that is what I've just said, but also the fact that they have more resource than anybody else on the grid.
True.
And they have done the whole time. Niki Lauda walked into that team and said, why are this team not winning every championship every single season? They should be. But they have they have a lot of internal politics. And I speak to my cousin about this all the time, because he's a massive Ferrari fan, and he tells me, you know, actually I quite like that. I quite like the fact that they bumble and they don't get on top of everything all the time, because actually that's all part of the romance of the team. And the fact that they take the press so seriously, that it affects them so much. And the same stuff that everyone criticizes them for is the same thing that makes them Ferrari. I think you're right. Other teams don't get the same scrutiny, but the reason for that is what I've just said. They don't have the same history. They don't have the same romance. They don't have the same expectation. They don't have the same resource.
Wow, Shez. That's techie. I think you've nailed it, you know, Shez, but I would raise you. I think there is something about, and probably a lot of Ferrari fans will tell me that this is part of the beauty, right? The tragedy, almost the elegance with which they lose. There is like a certain flair, like the mistakes. They don't lose like anybody else, right? There is a flair with which they lose. The way Charles, it's the old, is it the Carlsberg phrase? We don't do losing like anybody else. We don't do losing. We don't do losing, but if we did do losing,
probably the best losing ever.
But that's Ferrari, right?
I mean,
they lose in this way that's very poetic and Charles in the back. Am I wrong though, chaps? Like they don't do.
No.
I think sometimes. I think sometimes. I think like so. As soon as you said that, I had a mental image of Felipe Massa sort of driving down the pit lane in Singapore with his fuel rig attached. But actually, you're right.
You know what I mean? It's not. Yes, it's never just right.
Like. And actually, the loss. You know, at the end of the season, the way he lost was heartbreaking. but that was a good Ferrari team, right? That wasn't a Ferrari team that were making a huge number of errors. All right, Singapore accepted. Actually, they ran a good season. 2012 is another one where actually they ran a good season and they lost heroically. But why didn't they build a better car? There's always something that you think actually this shouldn't be happening to Ferrari. And yeah, sure, you can call it a heroic loss, but often it's not. And the way that they capitulated last season was not heroic.
Fair. I don't hate that. Shez. Baxty, chime in on this very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, look, I absolutely get what Shez is saying. I mean, Ferrari are the only team on the grid that have been there since day one. They are, they get paid money just for being there.
The veto.
They have a veto. They've got so much power, and I think with that history comes expectation. You expect Ferrari to be at the front, and it's just unique to them. They kind of, and there's always an expect. Ferrari expect to win. They don't necessarily build themselves to win, but they expect to win. That's their default. If they don't win the championship, that's a bad season. Doesn't matter how close they come. It's a bad season. 2020 was a bad season, because even though they were struggling, and then all those gains they made in 2021, but they still didn't win, so it's a bad season. They have the most passionate fan base. I mean, look, we're all part of Team Lewis Hamilton, but we pale in comparison to the Tifosi. Those guys are hardcore. Like they are bad, man. They look not like in a good way. I say that. And I think you look at McLaren and you look at Williams. They're historic teams, but they're just privateer teams. Ferrari comes with that manufacturer tag as well. So,
but it's an interesting one, isn't it? That like the period in which they had the most success, right, was when they were probably the least emotional about their own team. But actually, it's probably the period in which, although we look back at it with rose-tinted glasses now, at the time, it was such a steamroller that actually a lot of the passion was lost. And the wins where they the way they won it in 2007 actually, I think probably had a bit more cachet. And even the way Felipe lost in 2008, I think it generated a lot more feeling than perhaps Schumacher winning in 2004. And there's something about that dichotomy of, this is what we expect, but actually, as Cameron was saying, the way that they lose sometimes is sort of more emotive. But and the other thing I was going to say, sorry, back to you very quickly, is that I don't know very much about other sports. I'll be honest with you, I'm pretty bad, but I guess that the parallels with the Red Sox in baseball in America, right?
Such a good analogy.
That what did it? They call it the curse of the Bambino.
Yes.
That that they're so well funded, they should be winning every championship. Is it the World Series they play? I don't know. Yeah. Every season. But the fact that they don't is part of the magic of that team. And I think that's part of the magic of Ferrari, and it will be debated forever, but it's all part and parcel of who they are.
Love that. And I love the sporting analogy, Shez. I think you've nailed it there, bruv. Talking about you don't know anything about sports. Question from Gareth. I'm going to simplify it ever so slightly. You are Bernie Ecclestone. As at May of 2023, are Red Bull in a position sufficiently dominant that you intervene and start to tinker with the rules to peg back Red Bull more towards the second place team, whether that's Aston Martin or whoever? Baxter, you intervening as Bernie Ecclestone now?
Yeah, probably, but not as blatant as they used to do to Mercedes. I mean, you spoke about this previously. But the DRS shortening of the zones and introducing more sprint races seems to be a way of, because we know that Red Bull does need a bit more time. Well, they like the longer setup, even though they say that they can set it up in one session, but that remains to be seen, I think. I think they need to be paid back a little bit, but I think there also needs to be greater emphasis placed upon the other teams to actually step up their game. Like this, I mean, this is the dichotomy of the argument, isn't it? It's, do you peg back Red Bull, or do you just tell the others to up their game? I was pretty disappointed by Stefano Domenicali's recent comments saying that we're not in a position to peg back Red Bull. It was either him or Ross Brawn. I believe it was Ross Brawn that said when they introduced these regulations, we will peg people back if they get too far ahead. That's the whole point of these regs. And yet Stefano doesn't want to intervene. I mean, it's classic. It's classic F1 management. Ridiculous.
Oh.
But look, I think Red Bull do need to be pegged back a little bit. But I think I think with these cost caps, I think we should have sliding scale, like we have with aero testing and everything else. I've been saying this for a while, that you should give more resources to those lower down the grid, so it gives them an opportunity to spend that little bit more money, and allow them to catch up to Red Bull. I know that's punishing them for winning, but if you're trying to get equality, that's the way to do it without making it a spec series.
I hear you, Baxty. I've never been, and this is what people will say, Rob. What about how Mercedes were pegged back and party mode got disabled and whatever? I can only speak for me, right? And in my humble opinion, I've always been consistent with this. There is something to be said for competition, and that was one of the reasons why I got into F1 in the first instance. So, I didn't want to. Man, I'd never wanted to peg back Mercedes. They'd done the best job. Okay, so they had the most resource, but how this is F1, fellas, right? Like, what are we doing here? So I don't know if I do desperately want to see more competition, 100%, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea of artificially pegging back Red Bull. Not just yet. I feel like there's a way, and it is a super dominant car, chaps. Let's not make any. I'm not going to sit on here and lie. Kind of have that argument in good faith. Properly dominant, and I don't think we're going to get a lot of competition between now and the end of the season. But I don't know, chaps. It feels a bit. I don't know. It feels like a horse race handicap to do it now. Like, I don't know. This isn't the national, but F1. As a sporting formula is the derby, right? The best of the best. You can't just, for me anyway, I don't want to throw my handicap in there. Sorry, Baxty, go on.
Yes. Before Shez comes in, I think there was this thing. I don't know if you guys saw it. There was this picture that went around social media where it's like things that were banned on Mercedes car during their period of dominance, which half of it was complete nonsense. They were talking about the F duct, which was brought in by McLaren in 2010. Mercedes didn't even use it that much. Then there was there was the party mode ban, which didn't have too much of an effect, let's be honest. But where we're talking about they were pegging Mercedes back is that they basically had the 2017 reg changes that they said we've had 3 years of Mercedes dominance, we need to do something. So they changed the regs in 2017 to try and allow other teams to catch up. Then there was the 2021 regs, which were minor changes, but were designed to penalise the low rate cars of Mercedes and Team Silverstone, because they were the ones that were impacted the most. The theory was that it would impact Red Bull, but I'm not so sure that was the case. They had to make a decision very last minute because of COVID, and they thought if we want to tighten it up, we should probably do something that would impact Mercedes a little bit and allow other teams to get closer. I don't think they were expecting it to get as close as they did, but certainly I think there's definitely been efforts to peg Mercedes back, but more generalized rather than specific things, because if you try and penalize one thing, it's not going to change it. These cars are so well built and so well balanced that there's so many little things going into making a car successful or not, and to penalize a little gimmick like DAS or like the F duct, it's just not going to work.
Oh, bloody Nora! All very depressing, and I don't like the misinformation that we're seeing on F1 Twitter. Is that something new, chaps? It's always been so true to form, hasn't it? F1 Twitter and F1 social media. Go on then, Shez. Let me pitch this question at you before we get into some discussion and argument. So Rainmaker said, where is the sport in 5 years' time? Choose. I don't want it to look like IndyCar yet. I fear that is what these development controls and cost caps will eventually deliver. Holy smokes, Shez. Good luck with that one, mate.
Yeah, I saw that question. It's an interesting one. So I think 5 years from now, so we're 2023, 5 years from now, 2028. So we should be 2 years into the new engine regulations, right? And I have a feeling that it's going to be similar to where we're at right now, in that one team is going to have absolutely nailed them, and we're going to be sitting here going, "Oh, why have we why have we got weren't these new rules supposed to shuffle up the order?" I have a feeling that's probably going to happen. Maybe Audi will do it. Maybe Audi will turn up with an absolute monster of a power unit and chassis. Maybe they will have stolen Adrian Newey by then. Who knows? I guess Rainmaker's point is well made, but I do have some faith in the way that the FIA and F1 have gone about their business, right? This season is not a good advert for what they've tried to do. But in principle, and I think over the course of, in the fullness of time, we'll see that in practice it works as well. What they've created is a bunch of rules that, from a technical point of view, have been well researched and should work. But obviously, you can't correct for the fact that the teams will always find something extra to try and claw back everything that they've got. And I know this is part of the answer to the last question, but what Stefano Domenicali, I think, was trying to say was that there isn't a magic bullet ban that they can put on the Red Bull right now. All of the examples that you've given before, the double diffuser, the F-duct, the DAS, party modes, all of those were one-shot bans that they can do that have a immediate impact on what you think is the cause of a team's performance. Red Bull don't have that. It's everything in their car is just optimized so nicely that there isn't one thing that you can kind of go, right, we're going to get rid of the triple DRS. Well, okay, but you can't, because that's part and parcel of how they've packaged their entire car, and everything ahead of it is also caught up in that. So they don't have something they can absolutely ban, and that's why in this circumstance, I think it is up to the other teams to catch up. But the fact that the aero allowances have been sort of placed on a sliding scale now means that there is a chance for other teams to catch up. And the fact that Red Bull can't just spend their way out of trouble anymore, the same way that Mercedes and Ferrari can't, means that should, again, over the fullness of time, have tangible effect. I mean, we are only 5 races into this season, and yes, it's a very dominant Red Bull team, but you can't fault the FIA and F1 for putting in place some things that should level things out. And what I would expect to happen over the next few seasons is that tweaking continues. And if there are areas where they think that they can start to level performance without having to be draconian about it, I think they will. I don't think that necessarily means it will become a spec series as Rainmaker was worried about, because that's what we all worried about when they said that they were restricting the rules last year, and everyone was really divergent. And even this season, where everyone sort of converged slightly towards this Red Bull concept, actually you look at the Aston Martin, and although you could say broadly they have the same concept, but they still have things that are intricate and very unique to them, and it's giving them a performance advantage. And I think you're going to see that. I just think you're going to get a reset in 2026, and this whole cycle will happen again. And that's the same with every single rule cycle. It happened in 2009. It happened in 2017. It's happened in 2022. It will happen again. And all of the naysayers that say, "Oh, we should just keep it the same," I think, Cameron, you asked for it for the last rules to be in place for another season.
I did indeed.
you're going to say the same thing in 2027. You're going to be like, why didn't they just keep the 2022 rules for another season?
As
Because we had
everybody
such
converges.
a close. Yeah, I think that's just how it will work.
Oh, chaps, it's techie. Go on then. Last question, Baxty, for you, mate, before we argue about something.
Argument.
Mate, this is going to get techie as we round third base. But Asaf says, how do you make it through an awful season of a sport that seems not to give an ish about its core audience? How do you not just leave? Techie, any? Go on then, Baxty, get your teeth into that one, sir.
Oh, it's a good question. You always look for things to enjoy. I mean, I'm a Mercedes fan. I like to keep an eye on how Mercedes are doing, and we're in a fight right now to get back to the front of the grid, and that's how I take my enjoyment. And a lot of the time I've been having to take some licks and take the downside of that, which as a Mercedes fan since since the Brawn days, really, 2009, we've not had a lot of those bad days. And it's just about supporting the team and showing faith in both Lewis and George, seeing how they get on. I know it's easy to get dragged into some online beef, which I've definitely tried to avoid this year, particularly with a certain fan base. But then even within your own driver's fan base, it can still get pretty tasty. And it's one thing I've discovered over the last sort of 6 to 8 months is the community that goes around Formula One, and I think I'm very fortunate to have found you guys, to have found guys like Rory as well, who I do Twitter Spaces with every so often, and just that sort of general community and being able to talk with people is makes it more bearable, and you can actually still have these positive discussions even though Red Bull are running away with everything and destroying everybody. But I'm sure that's how other non-Mercedes fans felt between 2014 and 2020, and it's our turn to feel it now. But it's just about finding that community and enjoying it regardless of the lack of action on track. To answer the question about the sport doesn't care about its core base, I understand why people feel that way. I understand why people feel like that. I understand that we are trying to grow the sport, and Drive to Survive has done something massive like that, but there is still a core audience that needs to be catered to, and right now the product just isn't there. I go back to the quote that MBS said. He said, we're in the entertainment and sport business. Well, competition breeds entertainment.
Let's go. Shez, you look like you've got something to say, mate. You've got one cocked. Go for it, chap.
But only because but man, I've been watching this sport long enough to know what it was like in the Bernie and Max time. When Bernie sold up to CVC Capital, and it was awful. It was awful. They put no money into the sport. They just sucked it dry, made no changes. It was awful, and Liberty have come in and they have made the changes I wanted them to make. I wanted a budget cap. I got it. I wanted them to do a research-based technical shakeup. They did it. Okay, the product isn't exactly what you want it to be on track, but I can't fault the steps that have been made, and they've been done for people like me. I want this stuff. I want there to be a budget cap. I don't want there to be I don't want teams to be miles and miles ahead and dominant because they were able to spend their way into that position. And the position that we have this season, I mean, you say it's an awful season, but actually there's quite a lot to enjoy. I mean, the fact that we're able to have a weekly chat about what's going on in F1, even this week when we've got a race cancelled, there's still stuff to talk about, and we're having that conversation. For me, there's always stuff to talk about, and there's multiple reasons I think for why things have panned out the way they have this season, and some of them are just physics based. You can't predict, one, what teams are going to do, and two, with that development, what effect that's going to have on the rules that you've created. That's beyond the control of the rule makers. If they continue to do what they're doing right now and think that none of this needs changing, I'll agree with you. But if they go, actually, no, there's things that we can tweak, that will have a tangible effect on cars being able to follow, like making the DRS zones a bit longer. They made them shorter because it was too effective last season. That was in direct response. So saying that they don't have the core audience's interests at heart, I think is a little disingenuous. I think the individual instances where they make bad decisions we can have a discussion about those, definitely. But the overall strategy that they have, listen, this is the only time I've watched F1 where I can feel confident that at least I know someone is thinking about what's going on. They may not get it right every single time, but at least they understand what it is I want, and that's what they're chasing, and I can't fault that.
Oh, Shez, we have divergence finally. Houston, we have a problem. That I can't believe you spent 5 minutes there just defending Liberty Media and the FIA. I've got to provide some balance. I've got to provide some balance to this equation, because what Asaf's talking about there, I think, isn't necessarily the competitive aspect that you're talking about, Shez. You're a diehard, you're a grizzled F1 scribe who's been watching F1. Like, we're going back to like BC times now, Shez. You and me both. This is we've been in it a while. So what we want to see, and again, I'm not sure if we constitute F1's core audience. You guys have heard the stat that 1 in 4 F1 fans who are watching Grand Prix as at May of 2023 have come via Netflix, right, and Drive to Survive. So I'm not sure if we make up, I suppose from the outset, you want to define your assumptions, right? Who is F1's core audience? Well, if it's us, I agree with you, Shez, but I'm not sure it's us anymore. 10 years ago, it would have been. But I think that's an ever-evolving Rubik's Cube of a demographic, right? I think they're younger. I think they're more into social media. You have the TikTok generation that are just starting to watch F1. I think the core audience looks different. And to that point then, Shez, if those are the assumptions that we're using, within those parameters, they couldn't give a monkeys about cost cap necessarily. What they want to see is Max versus Lewis again, like hardcore every single weekend. They're not going to be. The joke is, Shez, the risk at the moment, and I'm sure it will be a delayed impact as far as viewing figures. But when they start to release them, I think we saw something similar in Miami, right? 440,000 last year, would it have been 440,000 this year? You can take that to the bank. So to Asaf's point, I think the core audience will want competition, want racing for first, second, third every single week, will want to be able to attend a Las Vegas Grand Prix without having to remortgage their bloody house. These are the things that we're talking about, right? And I think that's what Asaf's alluding to. Whilst there are some ticks, us here within these 4 virtual walls are all happy as Larry when they bring in the cost cap and rejig the rules and regs and present some aerodynamic problems to the geniuses of Allison and Newey and whoever else. That's us. That's right there within our wheelhouse. But for the rest of the F1 viewing population, they don't give a ish about that.
Yeah, but Cameron, I don't agree with that because I think those two things go hand in hand, right? F1 and the FIA are trying to create rules, technical and sporting, that fulfill what you are asking for. They want to create rules where there is competition for position 1, 2, and 3, and they want to bring F1 to new places, mainly in the States. But that's what they want to do, and the rules that they have created, in theory, should allow them to do that. In practice, that hasn't worked this season, but that's not their fault. They can't, they don't control physics, and they also don't control what teams can do. Now, if you want them to do exactly what you're talking about, make it a spec series. Just make it spec series, and then everyone has the same car. But then you lose the essence of what Formula One is about. And there's a fine balance to be tread here between creating essentially an entertainment category and keeping some of the technical nous that you and I appreciate.
I agree with that.
And that's why I don't think you can fault what they're doing right now, because they're trying to bring in that entertainment. They're doing it in a way that for me makes sense, in an iterative, research-based way. You don't need to explain that part of it to that new audience. You just need to allow that mentality, that theory, to play out with enough time that's how it naturally plays out. Forcing it is by pegging back Red Bull, by pegging back the team that's dominant at the time. That's what I don't agree with, right?
No, me
but,
neither.
But perhaps that is what you need to do if you want exactly what you're talking about. That right now, this is how I want it, because we're looking at this with recency bias. This season has not been good. There has been a dominant team. The DRS is not working as well. Overtaking is not good. You told us that the technical regulations would give us closer racing. That hasn't happened. You could level all of these at the FIA and F1, but I don't think it's their fault. I think that's just the way that this has played out. Like, you can't argue that ground effects aerodynamics shouldn't allow these cars to follow better. Right.
No, agreed, Shez. But you're just everything that you do. Baxty, I'm afraid to you in a second, bro, because you've been quiet for ages, and I know you will have a couple cocked in the chamber for this. Shez, but you're everything that you're saying, I don't disagree with. But your die-hard 1994 Adelaide, Damon Helen, Michael Schumacher. I think we've both got those caps on, Shez, when we talk like this.
I don't think I have.
Because ultimately, the core audience, I don't think you said something there that I thought was quite telling. You said, ultimately, you shouldn't have to explain these things to the core audience. And I agree with you, bruv, but not in the same way that you mean, right? These things should be self-evident. When we're combing through the rule book to see whether Max Verstappen has won in Suzuka or he hasn't.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? That we're still when as an example, when as an example, Max comes out the pits at Monaco, and we don't know whether the rule is that he touched the white line on the pit exit. Did he not touch it? Do you need to cross it completely?
But these are sporting rules that they've been.
But Shez,
they've inherited, right?
Sack that off, Shez, because what happened? See, this is where I think you're being too nice. I didn't know that there was an FIA shill in the midst, Shez. But I think you're being very kind.
This has been here for a while, by the way.
I think you're being very kind to the FIA in defending them against what Asaf said, because there are glaring examples where the FIA, despite some of the strides that you've alluded to that Liberty Media have made, and they're worthy of credit for that. Those notwithstanding, there are still a plethora of opportunities, of black holes that are easy closing up, right? Very, very easy. The onboard of Max Verstappen steering angle Brazil, where is that? What, you're going to release that on Tuesday? The next what? Everybody's at work now. Nobody what are you talking about? So just a couple of examples, Shez, not necessarily competition related, but examples when I think still the FIA could do materially better as far as looking after their core audience. Shez, before I come back to you, Baxty, please talk to me, sir. You're still alive.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm enjoying it. Like, I'm in your seat when me and Shez go at it. Like, look, I think this is the eternal debate for Formula One, isn't it? There's always a period of dominance, and then you get some good action for a few years, and then the new regs come in and changes everything. Yeah, everything changes. We get another dominant team, and everyone's trying to catch up. Yeah, I think we were as I've said this before, we were very lucky in the previous regs that we actually had some form of competition. First 3 years, it was Nico versus Lewis, that sort of internal human battle. Then you have Ferrari versus Mercedes. Then you had a couple of duff seasons where it was just Mercedes kicking everybody's backsides. And then, of course, we had the all-timer in 21. But, if there was a silver bullet that could fix all of Formula One's problems, I think Stefano Domenicali would already have found it. And I agree with what you're saying that there is no silver bullet to stop Red Bull, that it's all physics. And Shez is absolutely right. I think Shez has kind of won me over more on this one. That you can't predict physics. And if somebody nails it out the gate, there's not a lot you can do. I mean, I think, and that there has, Liberty have definitely done things that they've given people like us more of what we want in terms of cost caps and everything else. Yeah, and people taking money out of things. Look, I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan. Don't get me started on that. But I just think that you can cater to your core audience in some ways, like they have been doing, but you also need to make sure that there is a product, because people are going to put eyes on the sport, see Max Verstappen winning every single race, and then go, well, this is boring. I mean, I wanted to get into Formula One when I was a kid, but Michael Schumacher was winning all the time. And I thought, where's the competition here? Why should I just watch Michael Schumacher go new all the time and win? And you might get the occasional win for Kimi Raikkonen, for Fernando Alonso, for Rubens. Sorry, I've not been well all week. I've got a bit of a cough. And it's just, I think you need that competition, and you got to find a way to get some competition.
Agreed, Baxty. It is that friction. Shez, I cut you off, brother. You were going to say?
No, it's okay. It's okay. It was. All I was going to say. The concession I'll make to you is that I do think there's an FIA problem, and there's a there is a difference between the FIA and F1. F1 under Liberty Media, I think, that argument I think makes sense to me, right? That all of the stuff that they have put in is constructive, and you can tell even now that F1 under Liberty Media and the FIA are not seeing eye to eye, and that's because of exactly what you've just said. Is that the FIA are still stuck in a period from before, because they've inherited a whole bunch of stuff, and they've lost the bridge that they would have had, and by that I mean Charlie Whiting. That if Charlie had still been around, God rest his soul, a lot of this would have been smoothed over. Just having that experience and being able to know what the rules mean because you wrote them would have probably meant that wasn't an issue. I think back to before Liberty came in, the rules at that point weren't the issue. At that point, it was the fact that the holding company were just sucking the money and the soul out of F1, and the FIA were sort of actually in a fairly stable state because you had a set of rules that were being interpreted in a sensible way. And what's happened now is that it's been switched on its head, in that the rights holder have the right idea, and the FIA are the ones that don't know what they're doing.
Fair.
And I think what we need is a period where both of those two entities are aligned in a good way.
Yeah,
and then we'll be golden.
I feel like we've just troubleshooted for the whole of the ills of F1 in all of history, eh? Get on the same hymn sheet. And I wanted to do a top 3 chat, so we don't have time. Next week, we will get to it. I've got to go and watch a football game, the last remnants of. Right, peddlers, do me a favour. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, scroll to the top, drop a 5-star review, because if not, why not? This podcast will burn to the embers. I don't want that. You don't want that. Ringo here definitely doesn't want that. If you're watching on the YouTubes, like, comment and subscribe if you ain't already. If you are on the YouTubes, go over and check out Baxty B F1 channel, one of the goatiest F1 channels on all of the YouTubes, and then go over to Twitter and give him a follow at Baxty B. Shez is at ShezMed on Twitter. Podcast pending at some point, I think, with Shez and Shez's cousin. You guys have been fantastic. We will catch you same time, same place next week. As always, remember, between now and then, look, but never stare. Peace.